if you give a kitchen, and I know a lot of people in hospital as well, if you give a kitchen a little bit of heads up, say, hey, I've got someone coming in my group who is a vegan, then I'll go, okay, a little bit of planning and a little bit of prep, it's not that hard for a chef to do something with.
Yeah.
But if you come in and say, in 5 minutes' time, I've got a vegan coming in and they can't eat X, Y, and Z, and there may be a valid reason why, it might not just be a principled stance, then you can work with that.
Yeah, and I mean, this person was asking in advance, I'd hate to have a nut allergy and going to headquarters, and he's like, oh, well, never mind, here's an EpiPen, or go away. You know, it's like, just be polite, just have respect.
Yes.
Everything we've talked about today, Wallace, just comes down
There's
to
a
respect.
theme, isn't there, Penny Ashton?
It is.
Yeah.
Respect each other's decisions, unless you're Don Brash.
Yeah, and on that, kia ora, the panel, there are 3 great videos on YouTube that were made by Auckland University wherein one young people who are Māori and Pacifica talk about their experiences of racism at university. It's called I Too Am Auckland. It was made about 5 years ago, and it's shocking what the student had to put up with. I feel that the white supremacist posters has the potential to validate the racism that already exists. Māori ora says. So that's a great email. So that is up on YouTube now, and it's called I Too Am Auckland. Okay, so we've had a few stories lately about neighbours at war, and today another, this time out of Napier. The offending object, a basketball hoop. Now, it all started when the Hiha family put up the hoop on their own property for their teens boys. A neighbour complained to the local council, and staff told the family they'd have to move it. So they agreed to move it 2 metres further from the fence, but the neighbour still wasn't happy and told them, look, the hoop was an eyesore and very, very noisy. And there's actually been more to this. They said, look, the noise created by the kids, Petty, playing with the hoop can actually sometimes go from 10 a.m. to 9:30 at night.
Oh, you know, that would drive me crazy. Yeah, no, because I've got neighbours, and we were actually just commenting about how delightfully quiet generally it is. We have neighbours that have young kids, and they have a basketball that's right by our fence, and so we've had quite a few basketballs over the fence. But, like, it hasn't been that bad. It hasn't been that long. Like, that's I can deal with a couple of hours, you know, and also the sound of children laughing and having a nice time. But 12 hours? Continuous?
Well, I don't know if it's continuous.
Or is it just when it starts and when it finishes?
You support the person who wants to remove their hoop.
Well, I mean, but at least it's just a couple of hours and then, you know, get over yourself. But it's like, if it's... It probably
These are
isn't at all
14-year-old boys playing in their own
backyard. They've got to go to
their
school.
own backyard.
Can't be continuous. So if it's just a couple of hours, then
in their own backyard, Penny.
I know, but I was near somebody that was practicing a football and they were kicking it into a garage door continually, and my word, it got annoying. But as I say, it depends for how long they're doing it.
Chris?
Perhaps there needs to be a little bit of compromise on both sides. I think it's unreasonable for the neighbour to say that it's an eyesore and that they shouldn't be doing this because it annoys him. But if, you know, and I know some of these boys who love their basketball will play for hours and hours on end, maybe an hour here, an hour there, a bit of break, a little bit of, let's just mix it all up a little bit so everyone, you know, has a little bit of balance and there's a little bit of compromise, you know.
Always the voice of reason from Chris.
Voice of reason.
Voice of reason.
Dialogue.
Yeah.
Getting together.
Exactly. Like, don't talk to the council, talk to your neighbour.
Tato, respect goes both ways.
There we go. It all comes down to
Chris
respect.
Wakata, Penny Ashton, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. It's been fantastic. I'm Wallace Chapman, back with you 3:45 tomorrow. See ya.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, the government reckons a raft of changes unveiled today will really sock it to energy prices. So how low can you expect your power bill to go, and when? Pike River families make it to the wall that separates them from the men they lost in the mine 9 years ago. The accused mosque gunman abandons his attempt to move his trial out of Christchurch. A 3-year-old Kiwi orphan is thought to be trapped in a Syrian refugee camp. And should parents be fined if their kids leave school early? And if you think measles as an adult is a walk in the park, think again. For one Auckland family, it's been life-threatening and life-changing.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The National Party has dismissed the government's plan to bring down power prices as mere tinkering around the edges. The Energy Minister Megan Woods unveiled a suite of changes to the electricity sector today, including a ban on companies offering last-minute deals to dissuade people from switching providers. The National MP Jonathan Young says the government drummed up fear about people being ripped off by power companies, only to discover the sector is in good shape.
There's kind of nothing to see here in New Zealand that's going dreadfully wrong. The countries that I have talked to about our electricity sector say we are way ahead of them anyway. So I think it is underwhelming.
Jonathan Young says ultimately the government is to blame for rising power prices due to its decision to ban new oil and gas exploration. The parents of one of the men killed at Pike River have said sorry to him as they visited the mine seal. Brian and Barbara Naiper were among 25 family members who went 170 metres along the mine's drift to where it sealed. Brian says it was very emotional and hard to see the wall still there. And Barbara says they had a message for their son.
Time that he needed us most and we couldn't do anything, we couldn't be anywhere, and that as a parent is really hard, so I did say sorry.
Barbara and Brian Naiper say they are looking forward to when the seal is breached. Families of those who died in the mosque attacks and those who were wounded are relieved the trial of the accused shooter will stay in Christchurch. Brenton Tarrant has withdrawn his application to have his trial moved to another city. The decision was announced this morning in the High Court at Christchurch, where about 80 members of the Muslim community had packed the gallery. John Milne, whose 14-year-old son was shot dead at the Al Noor Mosque, spoke to RNZ on his way into court today.
I'm hoping that I won't have to travel away from here to attend. I'm hoping that it will be held here, where it should be held, for the people to actually record what is happening, the people, the hurt, the suffering, the pain. It must be held here. It must be.
John Milne, whose son died on March the 15th. A government-commissioned working group has recommended spending more than $10 billion on relocating Auckland's port to Northland. The Associate Minister of Transport, Shane Jones, says the days of Auckland's port are numbered, and he is backing the huge infrastructure project, shifting the port to Northport near Whangarei. The interim report estimated the capital cost of a full move of freight operations would be $10.3 billion. Mr Jones says the ports of Auckland struggle, and the proposed move, while colossal, appears to stack up.
This is the King Kong of infrastructure projects, nigh on $10 billion. It will take some time, but it gives substance to our government's position that we are transformational. This is arguably the epic infrastructure project of my generation.
Shane Jones says he and other ministers will consider the final report from the group, which is due to be delivered soon. The government is being told it must intervene in the case of an orphaned child believed to be stuck in a Syrian refugee camp. Save the Children says the 3-year-old's mother was a New Zealand citizen killed in the Syrian conflict. Andrew Johnston says his colleagues are providing humanitarian aid in the camp. He says the situation there is increasingly dire and the government has to act.
We're just calling on the government and the authorities to try and get the details and try and get, if there is New Zealand children there, we want to urge them to bring those children home to where they can be safe.
Save the Children's Andrew Johnston. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand doesn't have consular assistance in the area and it's difficult to get information. Train services have resumed in Wellington after the main station was evacuated after an alarm earlier this afternoon. Metlink says while trains are running again, there will be disruption. The evacuation meant Auckland trains were also briefly suspended this afternoon because the Kiwi Rail-operated National Train Control Centre is based in Wellington Station. They have since resumed, but AT spokesperson Mark Hannon says regular train timetables were affected.
It started about 2:30. Trains started stopping across the network because of the evacuation of National Train Control in Wellington. Clearance was given by police at 3:30 and services are now operating. They will operate on a 20-minute frequency for the rest of the afternoon peak. So there will be some delays.
Mark Cannon says normal services were expected to resume by early evening. It's coming up to 5:05. Tom Walsh believes he'll have to throw a season's best to defend his world shot put title in Doha. The South Canterbury builder has recorded a best heave of 22.44 metres this year, which ranks him third in the world. Walsh won with a throw of 22.03 metres at the last World Champs in 2017, but expects that'll be the minimum requirement to challenge for a top 3 finish this year.
I think if you throw 22, you've got a chance to get a medal. It probably won't give you the chance to win for sure, because shot put's moved on from that, and it's a great time to be a part of shot put and to be one of the guys moving it forward.
Qualifying in the men's shot put starts early tomorrow morning, with Jack O'Gill also taking part. The All Blacks have a very important low-key couple of days ahead as they prepare for their next World Cup match. The New Zealanders head to Tokyo following their 63-0 win over Canada last night. They now have just 4 days to get ready for Namibia, and Beauden Barrett says the quick turnaround will be challenging.
Yeah, we've got to get back on the horse pretty quickly and recover very well. I think the whole squad's going to be put to test over these 2 games, and I guess that's the beauty of it, when you rely on the full squad to work hard together and front up for these 2 games.
Beauden Barrett. And tonight Fiji will look to bounce back from their shock loss to Uruguay when they play Georgia, while Ireland play Russia. That's the news.
Re-examining history.
Where to from here? Do we want to take those old attitudes, those old colonial postures, those kind of ideas of superiority into the future? And I would suggest that we should leave them in the dustbin of history.
Rewriting history.
The do-nothing Democrats should be focused on building up our country, not wasting everyone's time and energy on, and I'm told I can use this word on the air, bullshit.
The first draft of history. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, the man who saw 11,000 kilometres of New Zealand from a bike. And after 10, whoppers, porkies and fibs. Author and independent fact-checker Tom Phillips on the history of lying. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland through to Whanganui, including Coromandel Peninsula, Taumaranui and Taihape. Cloudy periods and a few showers, clearing most places tonight or tomorrow morning and becoming mainly fine. For Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine apart from isolated showers this evening. Wairarapa, remaining showers will clear and weather will become fine. Manawatu to Wellington, mainly fine, cloud increasing tomorrow. For Marlborough and Nelson, fine apart from isolated showers tonight, mainly about the ranges. Bulla and Westland, fine tonight apart from isolated showers in Bulla, showers developing everywhere tomorrow. For Canterbury and Otago, except Clutha, mainly fine, remaining showers about Banks Peninsula clearing. Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, a few showers clearing about Southland and Clutha tomorrow morning. However, rain everywhere tomorrow night, heavy in Fiordland. Chatham Island showers with hail possible tonight. RNZ National, it's coming up to 9 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The public are being promised lower power prices as part of a suite of changes to the electricity market. But how much and when remain up in the air. The Energy Minister, Megan Woods, has committed to 20 proposals recommended by the Electricity Price Review, which it ordered last year. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
With the brisk winter still in mind and spring southerlies in swing, Kiwis are all too aware of biting power prices. And the government too.
Not everybody is getting the benefits of competition, and too many people struggle to meet their monthly power bill.
The Energy Minister, Megan Woods, unveiling how she wants to change the electricity market. Among the moves, a temporary ban on companies making last-minute offers to try win back customers switching providers. Power companies have also been told to ditch their prompt payment discounts, and a pilot scheme will be set up to help customers shop around for better deals.
Taken together, these changes will boost competition in the sector, put more money back into the pockets of New Zealanders, and help make our electricity sector fit for the future.
The opposition unimpressed.
I believe it's tinkering around the edges.
National's energy spokesperson Jonathan Young says the government drummed up fear about people being ripped off by power companies, only to discover the sector is robust, with residential prices ranked the 10th lowest among 35 OECD countries. And he says most of the work's already underway.
There's kind of nothing to see here in New Zealand that's going dreadfully wrong. Countries that I have talked to about our electricity sector say we are way ahead of them anyway. So I think it is underwhelming.
Power companies are broadly on board and say they're looking forward to working with the government. But it's too early for Cameron Burrows from the Electricity Retailers Association to give an indication of how much or even whether prices will fall.
You can't say that these changes will bring down power prices.
Well, for individual customers, we want them on the best deal for them, and so people can save up to $200 by switching, but it's still too early to see exactly what the overall impact of these will do.
For the large electricity generators, Genesis, Meridian, Mercury, the biggest shake-up will be new restrictions regarding the wholesale market. In simple terms, they'll face new rules governing the price at which they can sell electricity to smaller retailers.
That's another area where the devil's going to be in the detail.
The government reckons the plan will level the playing field for smaller or independent retailers like Flick Electric. Its chief executive, Steve O'Connor, is cautiously optimistic, but he too wants to see how it will work in practice.
Look, there's no doubt that changes in the wholesale market are essential, both for the survival of independent retailers who don't generate their own energy and also for a forming and competitive market generally.
The Electricity Authority is responsible for now turning the proposals into reality, and while the government can't technically direct its hand, it is passing a new law which will allow it, if necessary, to bypass the authority and make the changes itself. Atu iti whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi ko Craig McCulloch.
I'm keen for your feedback on that one. Let us know. Do you think those changes will lower your power bills? Does it go far enough, or is it just tinkering around the edges? And what have your winter bills been like? Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And we'll ask those questions of ourselves, of Megan Woods, after 6 o'clock. Pike River families have stood for the first time at the wall that separates them from the men they lost in the mine 9 years ago. About 25 family members took it in turns to travel the dark, wet 170-metre rock tunnel to where the mine was sealed shortly after the disaster that killed 29 men. Some took mementos, others left them, and many say they are looking forward to the seal being broken. Reporter Rowan Quinn and videographer Simon Rogers are at Pike River, and they filed this report.
Anna Osborne and Sonia Rockhouse have led the fight to re-enter the mine and today took the next step together. Anna's battling lymphoma and says the visit will give her strength as she begins stem cell treatment tomorrow. They put their hands on the seal and Anna says she could almost feel her husband Milton's presence. She had a message for him.
I just said to him that we haven't forgotten. We are coming for you. We're getting closer, and I hope he's proud of what we're doing because we won't give up. They deserve so much better than what they've got, and for as long as I live, I want justice, I want accountability, and I want our men to know that they're not going to be forgotten.
Sonia Rockhouse left a small bouquet of garden flowers. She was thinking of her son Ben, who died, but also her two other boys. Her older son Matthew made the journey today, and Daniel, a Pike River survivor, was there too, back from Australia to accompany his mum. It's the furthest he's been into the mine since it almost took his life 9 years ago.
He's a huge part of this as well. Even though he's not here a lot of the time, it's very difficult for him. He's got survivor's guilt and probably always will have. So, it's a difficult day for him.
Like all the family members, the women followed strict safety protocols, but not before giving every one of the mine workers a hug. They put on personal rescue packs, which contain half an hour of oxygen, and hard hats and high vis. Together they hung their name tags on the same board where the men had hung theirs 9 years ago. Then the drift runner, a short, open-topped little truck, drove them backwards up the drift so they could come out quickly if they needed to. Sonia says it gave her an appreciation of the work being done.
And I mean, it's really, really cold up there, and they're working in that every day. So, just lots of tears.
Like several others, Barbara and Brian Nieper, whose son Kane died, brought a small piece of rock out with them.
Oh yeah, it's emotional, don't worry about that. Hey, getting that fallen is just, that's it. She's a blank, is it? Still blank. I'm only pleased to be coming out this way, isn't it? That's what I felt. Hey, at least we're coming out,
Barbara says she felt a kind of numbness standing at the seal.
It was strange to know how you felt, because I think I felt empty, and yet I felt that was the closest that we've probably been for 9 years, and maybe just hopefully that we're going to get a wee bit closer yet.
And the pair had a message for Kane.
The worst part of the last 9 years is that we didn't get a chance to be able to help him as parents, kids, whenever they need mum and dad, and at the time that he needed us most, and we couldn't do anything, we couldn't be anywhere, and that as a parent is really hard. So I did say sorry, but we couldn't.
Like the Niepers, many families are already looking past today's emotional milestone to when the seal can be breached. And from Sonia, there's an air of defiance after the previous government said even going this far was too dangerous.
What to all the knockers that said it couldn't be done, hello, it's been done. So that, for me, there's some satisfaction in that as well.
And exactly when workers can go beyond the seal is now in the hands of WorkSafe, which has to approve the plans before anything else can happen. At Pike River for Checkpoint, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
It is almost 18 minutes after 5, and if you were listening to that but want to go back and look at the pictures from Rowan and Simon's piece, we'll put that up on our Facebook page and online. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. An Auckland father is facing a long, slow recovery after contracting measles and then encephalitis from a person he came into contact with for less than 2 minutes. 45-year-old Nick Penny thought he was vaccinated against the highly contagious disease, but caught measles last month and quickly developed potentially fatal swelling of the brain. He's now recovering at home, but his wife, Nikki Gillies, told me his diagnosis should act as a warning for others to check their immunity.
At the moment, Nick spends about 80% of his day in a very subdued environment, and any interaction or actions on his behalf really drain him, and he gets really quite disturbed and uncomfortable in his body. So we're just keeping him very low-key stimulation around him. And then we're just walking towards the rehab now.
Nikki, can we go back a step? Do you know exactly where your husband caught the measles?
I do. Yeah, I do. I do know where Nick contracted measles. There's potential for 2 exposures. The first was the period of around 2 hours, but that in a timeline doesn't work out. The second time that he was exposed, it was around a minute that he was in the situation with the person that was contagious at the time. And of our entire family, he was there for the least amount of time. And we left that situation to find out the next morning that that person had developed the measles rash, and then they were confirmed as a measles case. And then it was exactly 9 days from that minute exposure that Nick himself developed the initial stages of measles.
So just so I'm understanding this correctly, he just wandered into a room with a person who has measles, was in there for about 60 seconds, and that was all it took?
Slightly more probably than 60. He did kiss the person on the cheek and then left, but it was very, very intermittent, and he left very quickly. But yes, that was the level of his exposure.
Can you talk us through how things unfolded from that point?
So for the next 9 days, everything was fine. The onset was quite quick. We had friends over for lunch, and at the end of the lunch, he just said, I need to go to bed, I'm not well. That was the Sunday, the Monday, and the Tuesday. He has a work from home situation, so he worked both of those days and then again on the Wednesday, but it was only part hours at that stage. And then he signed off from his work computer on the Wednesday, and then that was the last that his work heard from him. And then the next thing, I was messaging them to let them know that he was in Auckland Hospital.
And at the point you went to Auckland Hospital, what prompted that?
Nick's breathing had become really laboured on the Saturday evening. His temperature was around 40 to 41 degrees, and he was quite disassociated from what was happening. And I rang Healthline, and they sort of talked me through what they thought could be potentially happening, and then we activated an ambulance. And the ambulance staff came and took him to the hospital.
When he was in hospital and he developed this swelling on the brain, can you remember the doctors telling you what was happening?
There's 2 phases to his hospitalisation. So Nick's behaviour had become quite unusual from probably around Thursday, and it was very, very difficult to connect with him and for him to allow me or our children any form of support for him. And that was quite extraordinary for us. It was a bit of a battle to get fluids into him. When we got to the hospital on the Saturday evening, I wasn't allowed to see him. They had decided that because they believed at that stage he was immunised, because we were immunised, our entire family had to go into quarantine. So I left the hospital to put the family into quarantine, and then we got more information the next day that said, no, in fact, Nick wasn't immunised, and it was very obvious that he was unimmunised from the severity of his infection, that we were able to visit. And so when I returned to the hospital, he was in a very unusual state, and there was cross-communication within the ward that he was being housed in. It's part medical, part infectious disease. And the infectious disease doctors came through and said, you're no longer contagious, and we can discharge you. And that was all Nick was wanting to have happen. And he was discharged and under a protocol that he needed to drink 3 litres of water, take his antibiotics for the secondary infections and Panadol for the pain. And I just said he's not coming home with me, because it was just not a person that I knew. And his mother came into support and took him home. And then she was the one that ran the ambulance again that evening, because he had become quite delirious. And that's when I arrived at Auckland Hospital at 1 o'clock in the morning, and Nick was having a CT scan and then a lumbar puncture, and he was diagnosed with measles encephalitis. That must
have been pretty scary stuff.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever stood outside a room with a young doctor who was telling me, I've never had the experience of being told that there was no treatment, and this is what the doctors are trying to prevent from happening in New Zealand in this epidemic, that once we get to this place, they can't do anything, and that's why they're wanting people to immunise and find out about their immunisation status, and that it is potentially fatal.
So what did they tell you about your husband's prospects at that stage? What were they saying to you?
They didn't say anything. Like, it was more we needed to wait, and we would hydrate him, and we would keep his pain under management. And then it was just waiting to see how everything would go.
So your husband, how would you describe him normally? Is he active, healthy?
Nick is a really, really fit guy. He is healthy, eats really well, exercises, he coaches a couple of football teams. He's, very active in his life.
And how did that compare to him at the height of this infection?
That person wasn't there. Like, that person was not there at all.
How worried were you for him?
I was very worried. I try to have a mindset where I'm just seeing the positive, the other side of where we are, and I tried to keep that in the forefront while we were going through it, and then holding that for our family, holding that for our children.
But the effects of him having the measles are not over just because he's out of hospital.
We're no longer dealing with the measles. We're dealing with brain injury from the measles. So there is encephalitis, brain swelling, that happens for different reasons, for different viral reasons for people. This is measles encephalitis, so this is a byproduct of the measles. And this is just something that the public aren't necessarily aware of.
So your husband had never been immunised as far as you know?
No.
And at the time he got measles, did you know that, was he aware that he had no immunity?
No, he didn't. He believed he was immunised.
Nikki Gillies speaking to us there about her husband Nick Penny, who contracted measles. Turning to sport now, and the All Blacks have made it 2 from 2 at the Rugby World Cup in Japan, trouncing Canada 63-0 in Oita after what seemed like an eternity between games. It was only the second time the team has kept an opponent scoreless at a World Cup, and it was the first time that 3 brothers all scored points at a World Cup. In fact, Bowden, Geordie and Scott Barrett all crossed the line in the 9-try thumping. Alex Perrottet with this report.
Some have described it as a training run for the best team in the world against the last qualifying team, but the hot and humid conditions pushed prop Atumoli to exhaustion in what he admitted was his first 80-minute game since high school.
Last game I had was in Perth, and just like off the field I've just been doing extra stuff, just trying to get fit. But I thought I'll build into it, but straight into the 80s, so it's crazy.
For the Barrett brothers, it was a try apiece. Scott Barrett not taking any risks putting the ball down after a clunky dive against the Springboks and dropping the ball over the line earlier in the Canada match. And he wasn't the only Barrett to fumble, with Bowden bombing a 5-pointer right at the death, owning the mistake but putting it down to the humidity.
We both can work on controlling the ball, in slippery conditions, but that's a pretty basic area, that one. Yep, a sweaty ball's more slippery than a rainy ball.
The fullback reflecting on what can be learnt from the handling errors during the game.
It was frustrating because we're aware of it and we know the solutions to it. We were just a bit too keen and eager and forced our hand, often looking for the offload.
And speaking of offloads, it was another impressive outing for Sonny Bill Williams, who had a hand in a number of tries, including a clever pass to help a grateful Rico Ioane post his 24th try in 27 tests.
To be fair, I thought he was going to go the whole way, and he just said he felt the guy starting to move a bit closer, so he chucked the lollipop, but yeah, it was awesome.
Coach Steve Hansen paid tribute to Williams, commenting on his deft kick to set up Bowden Barrett under the posts, saying the old Sonny Bill is back.
Yeah, he played really well tonight, and he's got a kicking game. I think he's done that kick about 4 times. We've scored 4 times from it, so 4 times since 2011 is not a lot of kicking, is it? But it's effective.
The All Blacks' next match is against Namibia on Sunday, a team searching for its first win at the tournament. Namibia's odds are 150 to 1, but the All Blacks will have to hold on to the ball a whole lot more if they want to eclipse Australia's effort against the African nation at the 2003 Cup, 142-0. They'll be happy the humidity is lower in Tokyo, while fans will be happier with the 5:45 p.m. New Zealand time kickoff on Sunday. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Minister Megan Woods on electricity reforms. Should parents be fined if their teenagers leave school early and don't go on to further training? And the Christchurch accused gunman withdraws a bid to have his trial moved to a different city. And why New Zealand Olympians are feeling the heat, literally. We'd love your feedback on anything you've seen on the program today. Do get in touch, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or Facebook us, Checkpoint, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Susanna with the headlines.
Power companies are generally on board with the government's sweeping changes to the electricity sector, but want to see more detail. Energy Minister Megan Woods has today unveiled a suite of changes designed to drive down prices. The head of the Electricity Retailers Association, Cameron Burrows, could not say how much prices could fall, but says the sector is looking forward to working out the details. Families of those who died at Pike River have for the first time reached the wall separating them from the men who died in the mine 9 years ago. About 25 family members took turns to walk through the 170-metre long tunnel to where the mine was sealed after the explosions which killed 29 men. Some took a memento while others left them, and many are looking forward to the seal being broken. Families of those killed in the mosque massacre and those still recovering from their injuries are relieved the trial of the accused shooter will stay in Christchurch. It was announced at the High Court in Christchurch this morning that Brenton Tarrant has withdrawn his application to have his trial moved to another city. A government-commissioned working group has recommended spending more than $10 billion on relocating Auckland's port to Northland. The interim report estimates the capital cost of a full move of freight operations would be $10.3 billion. Save the Children says the government must intervene in the case of an orphaned child believed to be stuck in a Syrian refugee camp. The charity says the 3-year-old's mother was a New Zealander, killed in the Syrian conflict. Andrew Johnston says the situation in the camp is increasingly dire and the government must take action. The country had a relatively low flu season this winter, both starting and peaking early, and already at a low level by the end of July. ESR says in spite of the early start, levels were no higher than usual, and the vaccine was a good match overall, even though a B strain of the virus changed. Those are the latest news and weather headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen and Nona Peltier's joined me for business news. Hey, we've been talking about electricity today, but this is a different twist in that story, isn't it? Electric car sales. What can you tell us?
Purely electric cars. So these are not the hybrids. They have broken a record in sales for the first time. We've got industry numbers. There were 500 sales in September, which is a large number.
So we're talking brand new vehicles here, are we?
Yes, they are. And not only that, as in the year to September, we had 1,400 of these cars sold. The year before was like about 700 and so. So it's a big jump up in the number of cars, electric vehicles being sold. Yeah,
but still relatively small numbers in the scheme of things.
It is.
People argue that they're they're pricey.
They're not cheap, mind you. These were basic ones. I think looking at this, I think that the more expensive ones are pretty pricey. The Teslas, I don't even know what they cost. They're certainly not in my price range.
Okay, let's talk about Simplicity. So this is the Kiwi Saver provider. They're looking at mortgages, are they?
Yes. So they're looking, so they're a fund manager. They put money in funds that are, say, just cash in the bank. Well, you're not getting very much interest on that. So they've decided that they're going to diversify a bit and offer, good quality mortgage lending. So this is like to first-time home buyers who have 20% down and have a good debt-to-equity ratio so they can afford it. Housing affordability is a big one. And they're going to offer them interest rates at 2.95%, which is undercutting the big banks by quite a bit. On the other hand, they're providing more opportunity for their investors.
So 20% though, depending on what market you're in, isn't it? 20% down is a whack of cash if you're looking, say, where we live, Auckland.
Yeah, well, exactly. So housing affordability, it really doesn't make any difference what your deposit is. If whatever your mortgage limit is, that's your limit. It doesn't make any difference how cheap the interest is or what have you. I mean, you can only afford so much, and anybody is means tested anyways. So, just because if interest rates are 3% or 2.95 or what have you, so what? You still have to pay that back to the bank. And, what are you going to buy for, what's the median price in Auckland these days? Over $800,000.
So they are looking clearly at the lower risk end of the lending.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, because these are, they're putting funds there are conservative funds, and, it's comparable to cash. So cash these days on deposit, it's not a lot, is it? No.
Hey, what's been happening on the markets?
Nothing very good, I have to say. No.
Okay.
Well, it turns out another front has been opened on the trade war with the United States and everybody else, this time with Europe. And so they're going to impose tariffs on about, I think, $8 billion worth of goods or some sort. And that has to do, and that caused the markets to really go into a spiral downwards. Europe had a terrible day. And Wall Street was not much better. Manufacturing data really disappointed, and private jobs numbers also weren't very good. So overall, our top 50 index, it followed along. Our worst one-day fall in 3 weeks. We were down 1.2%. That's 130 points to 10,821. Asia was also down, but let's not forget that China's markets are closed for their anniversary holiday. Our Kiwi, though, is looking not too badly, and that's because the U.S. is looking a little bit sick. So 62.7 U.S. cents. We've perked up just ever so slightly. 93.3 Australian and 50.9 British pence. That's our markets.
Thanks, Nona. And before we go, which team were you cheering for last night, Canada or the All Blacks?
Of course, the All Blacks. I would have cheered for Canada.
You didn't just want Canada to get one try?
Half a chance of winning.
Oh, so you back the winners. Okay.
Of course. Well, don't we always?
Business Journal backs the winners. Nona Peltier, thank you for that. The government's being urged to act swiftly after reports that the orphaned child of a New Zealand woman is in a Syrian refugee camp. Save the Children says it's in contact with the 3-year-old's grandmother, who is also a New Zealander but living in Australia. The boy's understood to be in Al-Hol camp, but the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it's incredibly difficult to get information out of the region, and she can't comment on the specifics of this case. Hamish Cardwell has more.
The Al-Hol camp in the desert on Syria's border with Iraq is home to 70,000 women and children escaping a savage civil war that's decimated the country. Kamal Debossi, whose adult daughter is being held in the camp, is part of a group of Australians trying to bring family home. He says the situation there is dire.
The conditions are absolute squalor. I can't begin to describe. They are in fabric tents, living, when we were there, in 50-degree heat. There is no sanitation.
Andrew Johnston from Save the Children says Islamic State has recently taken over parts of the camp and things are actually getting worse.
Just in the last couple of days, there's been massive increases in violence.
and we know winter is coming. We know since the start of the year around 300 children have died.
He says the government's got to act.
We're just calling on the government and the authorities to try and get the details and try and get, if there is New Zealand children there, we want to urge them to bring those children home to where they can be safe.
But international law expert Professor Alexander Gillespie says the government has no legal duty to repatriate New Zealand citizens.
This child, like many millions of other refugee children around the world, we need to be very concerned about ethically and morally, but legally that doesn't mean that we have an obligation to bring them back.
And he explains why.
If you started to bring home Kiwis who were in trouble, or families of Kiwis who were in trouble, then the obligations on the state would be far and wide, because you can imagine the amount of Kiwis all over the world, and and some of them get into trouble with authorities, and then some of them run out of money, and the next thing you know, then you've got a lot of plane loads of people that you're bringing back. No country operates like that.
The Prime Minister says the situation in Syria is very complex.
It's very difficult to get clear information from within the camps in Syria. There are literally thousands of people within them. Very difficult for anyone to gain access, and of course we don't have consular assistance on the ground. It is a very difficult and unsafe environment.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs told RNZ in a statement it was aware of media reports that there may be a small number of people in the camps with possible links to New Zealand. It says it does not comment on individual consular cases. RNZ has also asked Australia's Foreign Affairs Ministry for comment, but there's been no response. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell aho.
The High Court in Christchurch was packed this morning, where lengthy legal arguments were expected to be heard around why the Brenton Tarrant trial should be moved away from the city. About 80 mosque attack victims, some using crutches, as well as their supporters, packed the gallery. The accused's lawyers had both flown down from Auckland, and police sporting Bushmaster rifles were stationed on both entrances to the court. Then the news came, with Justice Manda announcing the application to move the trial had been withdrawn, with no explanation given. Conan Young was in court.
Anybody doubting the importance of today's hearing and the desire of victims to see the trial held in Christchurch only needed to hear the words of John Milne, whose 14-year-old son was shot dead in the El Noor Mosque. He spoke to RNZ on his way into today's hearing.
I'm hoping that I won't have to travel away from here to attend. I'm hoping that it will be held here, where it should be held for the people to actually record what is happening, the people, the hurt, the suffering, the pain. It must be held here. It must be.
After just 10 minutes, the hearing was over, and John Milne and the other families had been granted their wish. The accused mosque gunman, who has pleaded not guilty to 51 charges of murder, 40 of attempted murder and 1 charge of terrorism relating to the March 15 attacks, had withdrawn his application to have his trial moved. Afterwards, one man whose daughter was badly injured in the El Noor Mosque, and who can't be named for legal reasons, said he was grateful for the outcome.
Of course I am happy, otherwise I will end up travelling every court time, and that's going to be an extra cost for all the victims, and that's not just my decision, that was all the victim decisions. It's to go and meet and be in the courtroom as well.
The man was injured along with his daughter, and more than 6 months on still has to use crutches. He's determined to follow the trial all the way through to its conclusion.
Physically, I'm not prepared, but mentally, yes, I am prepared, because I want to chase that up. I want to see what's the law and how can the law can protect us and protect New Zealand later on from any act can happen in the future.
While the reasons for today's decision not to proceed with a change of venue application remain a mystery, applying to have a trial moved is par for the course for any defence, according to law professor Bill Hodge. However, whether the accused would have succeeded in such an application based on the need for an untainted jury is another matter altogether.
This was not simply a local crime affecting local people who knew everybody. It was not only a national matter, but an international matter. And you really wouldn't want people serving on a jury who knew nothing of it. That would mean that they were so well, I don't want to be rude here, but so out of touch that I would wonder about their capacity to make a decision on such matters.
Bill Hodge says the judge would also have considered the impact moving the trial would have on victims and their supporters.
There's some default principle to have the trial as close as possible to the scene of the crime so that justice can be seen to be done. And in my view, I think the community needs to feel like they have a stake in it. And if it gets moved off to another island, people can say, well, it's remote, it doesn't have anything to do with me.
The trial is due to start on June the 2nd next year, but the case will be back in court again on December the 12th for a pre-trial call-over. Kei o te tahi ahau mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Should parents of teenagers who leave school early and don't go into education or training be fined? It's one of the policies the National Party is reportedly looking into as part of its social policy review. Other policies under consideration are requiring gang members to prove they don't have illegal income before getting a benefit and reassessing the obligations of people who are on the benefit. Leader Simon Bridges has been coy about the specifics, but says these are priority issues for National. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has the story.
Simon Bridges isn't fazed. Details of National's potential policies seem to have got out before they're finalised.
No, look, I think it's great, actually, because it gets the ball rolling. This is important stuff.
One of the conversations this gets going is the idea of fining parents up to $3,000 if their children leave school early and don't go into education or training. Mr Bridges wouldn't confirm the policy idea, but he also wouldn't deny it.
Well, I'm just not going to talk about specific proposals until we release our discussion documents, because it's important that people see them in their complete context. We're definitely thinking about the first 1,000 days of a child's life. We're definitely thinking about, what people call NEETs, how we ensure people under 18 are in education, training or work.
Auckland Secondary Principals Association President Richard Dykes has this message for National.
Good luck to them. I've been down that path before in terms of trying to take students and parents to court for truancy, because those laws exist now, and it was an abject failure. The system just doesn't work that way.
Mr Dykes says there's no question having children in education for longer needs to be the goal, but taking a stick approach to parents would be ineffective. He says often the teenagers dropping out of school come from low socioeconomic families.
You're also going to be targeting families who could least afford that. So what do you gain? You take $3,000 off a family who haven't got the funding to support their child in learning. Fining them $3,000 isn't going to benefit them.
He says the money spent trying to enforce such a fine would be better spent investing in dilapidated truancy services.
They're out on the road, they're meeting with families, they're finding the students, they're talking to whānau, they're trying to find the barriers, and whether it's just following up and badgering them or whether it's working with them to find what are the blocks and what's the best place for these students. It's meeting the students and their whānau where they're at and finding the right educational setting for them.
Cracking down on gangs and beneficiaries who don't meet their obligations is another focus for National.
We're definitely wanting to think about gangs as well. No secret, we hate them. We want to crack down on them. Welfare's a big issue for New Zealand. We see that, dole numbers, entitlements are going up pretty fast actually under Labor with their soft approach. And so there will be obligations and sanctions on beneficiaries who don't live up to their responsibilities.
Reassessing beneficiary responsibilities and reducing beneficiary numbers by 25% are other policies seemingly being floated. Auckland Action Against Poverty Coordinator Ricardo Menendez-March says these aren't grounded in evidence and are nothing but beneficiary bashing.
The proposals are out of touch with the realities that beneficiaries are facing under this current government, and just seems a cruel and out of touch move by the National Party to stir things up for some votes while only hurting those that are most vulnerable.
He says forcing gang members to prove they don't have a legal income before getting a benefit will only increase the discrimination and stigma of an already marginalised group.
Those that are trapped in a cycle of violence need support and understanding. The last thing we need is to further ostracise them and cut them off.
National is due to release its social policy discussion document in the next month, when it will be seen which of the controversial policies floated has managed to stick. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
It's about 11 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think about that. Is it benefit bashing? Is it workable? Good policy? What are your thoughts? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's been another crazy day in Washington with President Donald Trump lashing out at congressional Democrats after they vowed to issue legal summons to the White House this week. Committees are demanding documents relating to the administration's dealings with Ukraine, which is now at the heart of an impeachment inquiry. In a tweet, Donald Trump has labelled the investigation as, quote, bullshit, accusing Democratic leaders of dishonesty and even treason. And at a bizarre news conference with the visiting leader of Finland, reporters found Mr. Trump feeling the heat from the intensifying impeachment probe. The ABC's Connor Duffy has the latest.
Finland is a happy country. He's a happy leader too.
That may be so, but the President of the United States is far from a happy man. Mr. Trump lashed the Democratic House Intelligence Committee Chair Adam Schiff. He appeared to say he wasn't fit to carry the jockstrap of his Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who has been subpoenaed by the inquiry.
He should resign from office in disgrace, and frankly, they should look at him for treason because he is making up the words of the President of the United States. Not only words, but the meaning, and it's a disgrace.
The President also says his call with his Ukrainian counterpart, in which he asked for an investigation of his political rival Joe Biden, revealed his tender side.
In fact, Lindsey Graham said, I didn't know you could be so nice. There was no quid pro quo. Remember before they said, the only reason I put that out, and I did it with the approval of Ukraine, by the way, otherwise I couldn't have done it, was because the whistleblower was so dishonest.
On a visit to the Holy See, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo could see or hear no evil either. He revealed he was listening in on the call with Ukraine's president, but didn't answer questions about whether it was appropriate.
As for was I on the phone call, I was on the phone call. The phone call was in the context of, now I guess I've been the Secretary of State for coming on a year and a half.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Back in Washington, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Intelligence Committee Chair Adam Schiff warned of consequences if Mr. Pompeo doesn't comply with their subpoena and deposition requests.
We are concerned that the White House will attempt to stonewall our investigation, much as they have stonewalled other committees in the past. It's why I say the White House needs to understand that any action like that forces us to litigate or have to consider litigation will be considered further evidence of obstruction of justice.
The White House is also likely to be subpoenaed. Unlike the Mueller probe, Democrats are racing to move as quickly as possible. Congressman Schiff also appeared to rule out the president's request to meet with the whistleblower, suggesting that could be dangerous.
This is a blatant effort to intimidate witnesses. It's an incitement to violence.
Despite the fierce rhetoric, there's been little in the way of new revelations that would aid the Democratic dash for impeachment.
Connor Duffy at the White House. World-class opposition won't be the only thing standing between New Zealand's top athletes and success at next year's Tokyo Olympics. Next year's Games in Japan are expected to be the hottest in Olympic history. It's a prediction that's had Kiwi officials working for 3 years on a strategy to ensure the performance of their athletes isn't overly impacted by the sweltering conditions. And as Clay Wilson and camera operator Dan Cook found out, it's a strategy they believe can provide New Zealand's best with a competitive advantage.
More a chamber of success than a chamber of secrets. Nestled away inside the Millennium Institute on Auckland's North Shore is a small room preparing Kiwi athletes for the energy-sapping heat expected at next year's Tokyo Olympics. And for sailor Molly Meach, a silver medalist alongside Alex Maloney at the 2016 Games in Rio, High Performance Sport New Zealand's heat chamber could be the difference between delight and disappointment.
I think being aware of the heat, like everyone's talking about it, but I think actually doing this and then experiencing Japan itself, I think it's going to be a pretty key factor, being able to control how you react in the heat. So I think it can be a definite game changer.
While temperatures of nearly 40 degrees are predicted for the 2020 Games, the addition of high humidity could mean it almost feels like 50. Conditions not only of risk to performance, but equally athlete health. The head of High Performance Sport New Zealand's heat strategy for Tokyo, Julia Casadillo, says the heat chamber causes physiological changes in the athletes, making them better equipped to handle the conditions.
The sailors, when they are competing, they're out in the water for up to 3-4 hours. So to simulate that is pretty challenging. But if we get them in there 60 minutes to 90 minutes, 5 days a week for a couple of weeks, then that's usually enough to give them the adaptations they need.
The chamber is set at 32 degrees, but is designed to feel like 37 when the humidity is cranked up to 80%. Once the door shuts behind you, it doesn't take long for the sweat to start pouring.
So being in here, immediately you can not only feel the heat, but the humidity. I can already feel the moisture being sort of sucked out of me, and I'm only just warming up, and this bike is on a fairly low setting. So you can imagine being in here for 30 minutes or more. It's a pretty difficult task.
Even if you're not on a spin bike, it's a pretty tough place to be.
You might already be able to see, if you're watching, through the lens, just how warm it is in here. And what you can't see is cameraman Dan is dripping from head to toe. Says enough about what it's like in here.
The chamber's effectiveness has already been put to the test. Our top sailors, along with other New Zealand teams and athletes, have this year taken part in Olympic test events in Japan. Rio Games bronze medalist Sam Meach says the room, built 8 years ago as a research tool, has already proved its worth.
We've had some days which feels exactly like this. You're doing everything you can to cool down, and that's exactly the day we're preparing for.
The chamber is a key part of a wider heat strategy put together by High Performance Sport, the New Zealand Olympic Committee and Paralympics New Zealand. Strategy lead Julia Casadillo is confident the project, and the small nature of the team compared to other nations implementing it, will be an advantage when it comes time to decide medals in Tokyo. A confidence echoed by medal contender Molly Meach.
We see some of the other sailing teams are struggling and people are talking about the heat, and I think our approach is just to kind of deal with it, know what works for you and what doesn't, and then be in the best kind of prepared state that you can be for the heat itself.
Just how effective the approach has been will be known in around 10 months' time. Moti hotaka o tia hipo nei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
And if you were listening to that on the drive home, I really recommend you go online and check out the pictures there of Dan and Clay inside that room. And it was Clay who was working out on the cycle. You get a real sense of how hot it is. One of our closest large neighbouring galaxies is a hungry beast of a system known as Andromeda. It's currently hurtling towards our own galaxy, the Milky Way, and the two are expected to collide in about 4.5 billion years' time. That collision is tipped to be a real galactic throwdown with only one to reign supreme. Now, astronomers have pieced together important details of Andromeda's past feeding habits, providing an insight into how large galaxies evolve. The ABC's Penny Timms reports.
For more than a decade, astronomers have been studying Andromeda, our pesky cosmic neighbour, because they can get a better view of it than our own galaxy, the Milky Way. Dr Dougal Mackey is a co-lead author of the international study and is with the Australian National University.
What we do know about Andromeda is that it's roughly the same size as the Milky Way, but we don't actually know whether the Milky Way or Andromeda is the more massive galaxy.
And that's important if they want to understand the Milky Way's fate. It's known that galaxies grow by eating other galaxies, but until now there's been few details about what those feeding sessions look like. So astronomers have been studying the region around the Andromeda galaxy. Lurking there are groups of stars known as globular clusters. Scientists have discovered two distinct populations orbiting Andromeda at right angles.
It seems like Andromeda ate its neighbours in two large bursts.
The first happened around 10 billion years ago when Andromeda was forming, the other about 3 billion years ago. Professor Geraint Lewis is another co-lead author of the study, which is published in the latest edition of the journal Nature. He's with the University of Sydney and says the findings help to explain more about how large galaxies form and how the universe works.
Galaxies like Andromeda and the Milky Way were embedded in this thing called the cosmic web. It's like this sponge-like structure of galaxies and material around us. Objects fall into our galaxies from this web, what we're sort of concluding is that these episodes of feeding came from different parts of the cosmic web. So, one came from a completely different direction to another.
Why that happened isn't yet known, but scientists hope that by piecing together this feeding timeline, they will also be able to understand which of the two galaxies is bigger. Knowing that will help them understand what will happen when the two collide. Professor Geraint Lewis again.
When big galaxies fight, there's rarely one winner. In the end, they're both going to lose because they're both beautiful spiral galaxies, but when they get close to each other, their mutual gravitational pulls are going to tear them apart.
So what does all this mean for life on Earth? Dougal Mackey again.
We don't expect direct collision between stars, typically. It may happen, but it's very unlikely. What we kind of expect is that they would see a very different sky.
He also concedes there is a remote chance the Earth could be destroyed, or the sun flung into the remote reaches of space.
We've got a bit of time before the news for your feedback. This from someone on the National Party's ideas about fining parents whose kids leave school early. Liz says, shocked to hear about that proposal.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. Another case of a student's body going unnoticed at a university hostel has emerged. An Australian man in his 30s died at Victoria University's Education House in Willow Street in January last year. His body was not found for about 3 days. He had been living in a one-person self-catering studio apartment and was found by a hall staff member. A former High Court judge is investigating the death of a University of Canterbury student whose body was discovered last month at the privately owned Sonoda campus. It's believed he had been dead for several weeks. Power companies are broadly on board with sweeping changes to the electricity sector, but want to see more detail. The Energy Minister, Megan Woods, has unveiled a suite of changes designed to drive down prices. The head of the Electricity Retailers Association, Cameron Burrows, says the sector is looking forward to working out the details with the government, but he's not able to give an indication of how much prices could fall.
For individual customers, we want them on the best deal for them, and so people can save up to $200 by switching, but it's still too early to see exactly what the overall impact of these will do.
Cameron Burrows says New Zealand has the 12th cheapest electricity in the OECD, and the average annual power bill is down $120 since 2015. The Justice Minister says stickers promoting a white supremacist group are putting universities in a difficult position. Material promoting the recently launched group was first put up at the University of Auckland and has now been spotted at least 2 other campuses. Katie Scotcher reports.
Auckland University has been criticised for refusing to rid its campus of the material, saying it's protected by freedom of speech. Andrew Little says it's a difficult situation, as these institutions have a responsibility to uphold academic freedom. However, Mr Little questions if the material genuinely expresses academic, intellectual and ideological views that are subject to public debate or represent expressions that are intended to be discriminatory. Ko Katie Scotcher aho.
A former Christchurch mayor says voters have to make a call whether they are comfortable with voting for an embattled councilor. Dion Swiggs has been on leave from council duties for a fortnight after allegations of grossly inappropriate social media messages and insisting on hugs instead of handshakes from people as young as 13. In the preliminary assessment of the Code of Conduct complaint against Mr Swiggs, investigator John Matthews concluded that 2 of the 5 complaints are material and require full investigation. Gary Moore says voters now have to make a decision over the future of Mr Swiggs, as he cannot step down because he is already on the ballot paper. Mr Moore also commented on the timing of the complaints against Mr Swiggs being leaked to the media.
I have to say, as an old political hack, when these things come out just before voting time, you'd have to say it's a bit suspicious.
Former Christchurch Mayor Gary Moore. A vintage bomber has crashed at an airport in the US state of Connecticut, killing 7 people on board and injuring 6 more. The Boeing B-17 aircraft crashed at Bradley International Airport while trying to make an emergency landing. The head of the state's airport authority says the plane was unable to gain altitude and lost control on landing, hitting a de-icing facility. This witness described what happened.
He wasn't really gaining altitude, and then one of the engines started to sputter. Smoke came straight out the back, and I said, oh, he just lost an engine. And then he came back and headed back towards the airport, and we hoped he was okay, and then we heard all the rumbling, all the smoke comes up, and we kind of figured it wasn't good.
The Boeing B-17 played a central role for the Allies in the Second World War and was dubbed the Flying Fortress. State Highway 7 will remain closed overnight by a slip between Greymouth and Stillwater. The Transport Agency says the slip has continued to move in the past 36 hours. A detour takes drivers via Taylorville. The agency will review the situation at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. Tom Walsh is primed for his world shot put title defence in Doha. The South Canterbury builder begins his bid for back-to-back titles with qualifying at the World Athletics Championships early tomorrow morning. Walsh says he's peaked at the right time of the year.
You know, I had a great few comps leading up into it and freshening up for that, and I think my team has done a great job in getting me in a great spot to make that ball fly in the next few days.
Tom Walsh. Fiji are chasing their first win of the Rugby World Cup in Japan when they play Georgia tonight, looking to put behind them their shock loss to Uruguay. Fiji lost their opening match to the Wallabies and were expected to account easily for Uruguay, but lost 30-27. Just 4 players have been retained from the starting lineup of the Uruguay match, and Domenico Waniburotu says they need to put the pain of that match behind them and finish the tournament strongly. The other match tonight is Ireland against Russia. Liverpool have chalked up their first win of the new Champions League football season with a 4-3 win over Salzburg after the Austrian champions came back from 3-0 down to level the scores. Chelsea also registered its first win of this season's Champions League, winning 2-1 at Lille. And Barcelona beat Inter Milan 2-1 in the day's other feature match. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, we check in with our overseas correspondent Lien Huang in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. Our window on the world looks at the history of forced adoption in Chile. And on New Horizons, William Dart is charting 2 decades of Tom Ludvigsen and Trevor Reeke's Trip to the Moon albums. That's Nights with me, Anna Thomas, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland through to Whanganui, including Coromandel Peninsula, Taumaranui and Taihape. Cloudy periods and a few showers, clearing most places tonight or tomorrow morning and becoming mainly fine. Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Fine apart from isolated showers this evening. Wairarapa, remaining showers clearing and becoming fine. Manawatu to Wellington, mainly fine, cloud increasing tomorrow. For Marlborough and Nelson, fine apart from isolated showers tonight, mainly about the ranges. Bulla and Westland, fine tonight apart from isolated showers in Bulla. Showers developing everywhere tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, except Clutha, mainly fine, remaining showers about Banks Peninsula, clearing. Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, a few showers, clearing about Southland and Clutha tomorrow morning. However, rain everywhere tomorrow night. Heavy in Fiordland. And Chatham Island, showers with hail possible tonight. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Energy Minister's confident a raft of changes unveiled today will help cut the number of households in energy hardship. But Megan Woods says it's too early to set targets or commit to extra funding for more energy efficient housing. Among other things, the final report from the Electricity Price Review recommends the government establish a cross-sector energy hardship group, agree on an official definition of energy hardship, set up a fund fund to help households who are struggling to pay power bills to become more energy efficient and ban prompt payment discounts. But not all of these hardship-related recommendations have been adopted in full. I started by asking Energy Minister Megan Woods how long it would be before people's power bills started to shrink.
In terms of the when, some of it will be quite immediate. So what we saw after the release of the interim report was Meridian took the step to drop its prompt payment discounts, or the, as I like to call them, the hidden late payment fees for people. And this has already resulted in $5 million going back into consumers' pockets. And the report estimates that there could be $45 million if all power companies do it. So some of it could be quite immediate.
Right. Well, seeing as you raised that, the prompt payment discounts, if it saves such a chunk of change, as was the case with Meridian ditching it, why don't you force them all to stop that rather than writing a letter to them and asking them to play nice?
Look, I am going to write to them in the first instance. I've had some conversations where certainly some other companies are open to it, so I want to explore that option. But look, we are preserving the option.
But they could have done that by now, Minister. If they wanted to, they could have done that by now. So why not just force their hands?
I think a number of them are waiting for the report to come out. But look, this can happen quite quickly. We're talking about a 6-month window here in terms of people being able to do that. That would be in place for next winter for people when they do that. So look, I'm going to try in the first instance to work constructively with the power companies. We didn't force Meridian to do it, and that's delivered $5 million back into customers' pockets.
So, Minister, if you're giving them the opportunity, how long's that time frame? How many months are you going to give them to do that of their own accord?
6 months is the time frame that's spelt out in the government response that we've released today with the report. But what we will be doing is also putting in place backstop legislation in parallel with this. So it will actually give us the ability to make some changes if voluntary measures don't come into force. So we'd be able to move quite quickly if that hasn't happened.
You mentioned 103,000 households in energy hardship. The recommendation is you set up a cross-sector hardship group. Why do you need another group when you've identified the size of the number of households in hardship, and you're obviously using a definition to do that already? So what purpose does the group serve?
Well, what the group will do is make sure that we're actually connecting all the different bits of the system that come to address this. I think that what we want to do is look at this from a health angle. 103,000 people living in energy hardship and potentially not heating their homes properly has health implications for us. We need to think of this from a housing point of view. We actually do need to be thinking of this not just through an energy lens, but what it means for us as a society.
Do you think that number's accurate?
Oh, look, actually, what this report has done is brought together the most sophisticated data set that we've ever been able to use in this country to look at energy use, that all of the power companies did voluntarily. We didn't have to force them actually release their data on power pricing. We were able to analyse that, or the review panel was able to analyse that down to the mesh block level. So we could see at quite granulated levels how much people were paying and map that across socio-economic data. So I do have faith in that number because I think this is the most sophisticated analysis we've had of energy use alongside other data sets that we have at our disposal as well.
Right, because one of the core things for the group to do is to define hardship so that you get a better energy hardship, so you get a better handle on the numbers. But if you think you've got accurate numbers, why are we replicating things here, setting up another group?
No, look, they're two separate things, Lisa. So what the definition of energy hardship is that in the absence of a clear definition that governments were using around what energy hardship was, that the group developed a definition, which is someone paying more than 10% of their income on their electricity or energy bill. So what we need to do is kind of just check across all the measures that there is the right definition to be using, and that works across all our indicators. This isn't just setting up another group. This is about making sure we've got all bits of government and the other groups that work alongside it, pulling in the right direction and addressing the fact that we have 103,000 people in our country who are living in a situation where they're paying more than 10% of their income on their electricity bills. That is a huge amount each month to be forking out.
So will you use those numbers to set reduction targets?
What this will do is it will feed into our living standards frameworks and the broader work that we're doing. We're not talking about setting targets here at this point, but that is still work that needs to be done.
Why not? Wouldn't that be useful? So the reason you quantify a problem is to show how you quantify a problem to show how much you can reduce it by, or measure how much you're reducing it by. So why not set targets?
Look, what that needs to be done is threaded through a whole range of work. That would simply be premature. There's a range of measures and recommendations that the report makes that we actually need to trial and see if they do make a difference.
As you point out, there are a lot of things here that are intertwined, and as the Housing Minister as well, how close is Housing New Zealand to, or WINZ, to getting bulk deals for their clients, bulk power deals?
Yeah, look, and that's something that Housing New Zealand and Ministry of Social Development are working through on that. We already have some other models where we have bulk deals essentially through with Grey Power, who essentially have a deal with a power company in terms of selling to a group of people. So that work is well progressed. And it needs to be continued to work through. I can't give you an exact date right here and now.
So do you have a time frame for achieving that for Housing New Zealand clients?
No, I'm not going to give a time frame today. That's work that's underway and it's continuing to progress well.
The other interesting thing in this report was that, well, it seems that we're not actually being overcharged for power as such. We're the 10th lowest in the price range of 35 OECD countries. We're the 6th highest in terms of consumption, right? So we're using a ton of power. And this report points out that a lot of that is due to our really poor houses in terms of energy efficiency. So why would we allow our biggest landlord, Housing New Zealand, to have until 2021 to fix up state houses so that they are warmer and more energy efficient? That would be an easy win if you brought that forward, wouldn't it?
Oh, look, you're absolutely right. The energy efficiency is absolutely critical to this. And that, 2021 is actually getting alarmingly close. We're in October 2019 now. That is work that is progressing through that. We've also introduced the Warmer Kiwi Homes initiative this year that not only has insulated 10,000 houses, but has also this year brought in the ability for people to put more efficient forms of heating into their homes, because we know that is absolutely critical.
But can you see, Minister,
getting this right?
Sorry to interrupt, but can you see how some people looking at this will think, well, here's two government policies pulling in opposite directions. You want us to be more energy efficient, you want to get prices down and bills down for consumers. At the same time, the biggest landlord in the country has got a couple more years to make these houses more energy efficient. Doesn't it make sense to do it more urgently?
Look, I don't accept that they're pulling in opposite directions. Pulling in opposite directions would be if we had no program of work to insulate our public housing. That it simply isn't the case. We have a program of work that we're rolling out, and that actually is moving swiftly. We're also building a huge number of new state houses, which are obviously insulated to higher standards, have double glazing, all those kind of things that building code requires. So that they are moving in the right direction.
One of the recommendations was to set up a fund that people could apply to, in essence, to improve their home and make it more energy efficient. Why has that recommendation not been embraced entirely? You're going to give it some consideration, but you haven't committed to setting up this fund, have you?
Oh, look, we can't commit outside of the budget cycle to setting up funds. But some of the recommendations obviously require new appropriations. But I think it is worth remembering that we do already have a fund that does precisely that, and it is the Warmer Kiwi Homes program.
But this is an additional fund.
It is additional. And
so can you commit to that this term? Can you give us a commitment to that this term?
I can't give a commitment to anything that is subject to a budget bid. I don't think any minister would be foolish enough to commit to something before that it had been through a budget process. These are all things that will have to be considered through our normal funding rounds.
Because the report makes the comment that in order for this to work, a lot of these policies are tied in together. There's no point identifying people in energy hardship if you can't then help them make the changes they need to. So these policies go hand in hand. So
absolutely, and this is exactly where our wellbeing approach to budgeting comes in. That we're not seeing this just through an energy lens, we're seeing this through a housing lens, we're seeing this through a health lens, And that's the way that we very much approached the Warmer Kiwi Homes Fund when we set that up, that we know that we can make a difference in people's lives when we insulate their homes. And for the first time ever, recognising that it's all well and good having an insulated home, but if you don't have an affordable, efficient heat source in that home, you're not going to heat it. And that's why it has been a priority for our government, making sure that we are getting that support to people, because not only does it improve people's health, but that also reduces our energy consumption.
So one thing that caught my eye was that Mercury analysed the winter energy payment, the government's winter energy payment. And this report says that you could pay the entire energy bill of every person in that energy hardship category, and you could also purchase energy efficient appliances for them all by using that fund. So why not use it for targeted help rather than giving it to a number of people who may not need it? They're not means tested.
Oh, look, I mean, one of the things I know as a local member of Parliament is the absolute difference that winter energy payment has made to people and their ability to heat their homes over winter. I've had so much feedback from the people that I represent about the fact that actually they are able to keep themselves warmer and more healthy through winter.
And that's fantastic, Minister. That's fantastic. But what about the people within that group who financially do not need that money but are still getting it? That money could be targeted, so why not use it in a more targeted way?
Look, I'm not convinced there's a whole lot of people in that group that don't need it. That what we do know in terms of people on superannuation, where this argument often comes up, there's more than 2/3 of New Zealanders that their sole source of income at retirement is national superannuation. This is one of the significant groups that is being targeted through the winter energy payment. And I know firsthand from my constituents what a difference it is making to that. I think that often it is overblown, the argument about the people that don't need it, that are receiving it. When I look at the difference that it is making to people's lives, we're certainly not going to take that away from them.
And that's Energy Minister Megan Woods. It is almost 21 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. An independent investigator has found that complaints of inappropriate behaviour against a Christchurch councilor will require a full investigation. Dion Swiggs has been on leave from council duties for a fortnight after allegations of grossly inappropriate social media messages and insisting on hugs instead of handshakes to people as young as 13. In the preliminary assessment of the Code of Conduct complaint against Mr Swiggs, retired High Court Judge John Matthews found that 2 of the 5 complaints warrant a full investigation. One of the complaints has been referred to an unnamed agency, and the 3 remaining complaints have been dismissed. Our Christchurch reporter Anand Zaki has the story.
The under-siege councillor Dion Swiggs hit out at the Christchurch City Council's independent assessment at a media stand-up today, saying he was disappointed at the decision from John Matthews.
The decision has been made without fair consideration of all information. In it, Mr Matthews states he has had no contact with me or any of the complainants. The decision also refers to information he has received, which has not been passed to my senior legal counsel.
Mr Swiggs also released messages he exchanged with the complainants.
These messages were provided to Mr Matthews and are important. They provide context to the complaints. Today I am providing screenshots of messages to provide that context. I am disappointed that I've had to do this, but I feel I've been left no choice.
In the messages, Mr Swiggs asks a complainant on May the 15th about where their Facebook profile picture is. A part of the social media conversation which has been voiced up starts with Mr Swiggs saying,
"Yo, where is your profile picture?"
To which the complainant replied,
"Ah ha 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 ha, I didn't like my last one and need to take a new one, laugh my ass off."
Mr Swiggs replied to that by saying,
"But you are a good-looking dude no matter what. Don't be too harsh on yourself."
In his preliminary assessment report, John Matthews says the complainant of the messages spoke of feeling uncomfortable and effects on their mental health. Mr Swiggs commented on the timing of the leak of the complaints to the media.
I believe the leak to the media about these complaints at the same time that voting papers were posted is not coincidental.
Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell would not be drawn to comment on the news that 2 of the complaints will be investigated fully. But questions still remain on whether Ms Dalzell or the council did enough when the complaints were first brought to their attention in May. The city's former mayor, Gary Moore, also says the timing of the complaints being leaked to media is a bit suspicious.
I have to say, as an old political hack, when these things come out just before voting time, you'd have to say it's a bit suspicious.
Mr Moore says Mr Swiggs cannot stand down by law as he is already on the ballot paper.
The voters of Christchurch Central have to make a call individually on whether they feel comfortable with Dion now.
Mr Swiggs says his legal counsel, Phil Shammy, has advised him to take 48 hours to consider further advice, which may include filing in the High Court for a judicial review of the process. RNZ News contacted the complainants for comment today, but they have not responded. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, ko Ananzaki tēnei.
And we have since received an email from Penny Prescott from the Canterbury Youth Workers Collective, an organisation supporting the complainants. She condemns Dion Swiggs' release of his text messages and says they are only a portion of what has been raised in the complaint. Penny Prescott says it's not just the messages that are of concern to the young people, but the overall pattern of behaviour. She also denies that the timing of the complaints was politically motivated. The Associate Minister of Transport, Shane Jones, says Auckland's ports days are numbered and the epic $10 billion move to Northland should happen. A government-commissioned working group has recommended the relocation and says it's the most beneficial of all the options available. Shane Jones told our reporter Jordan Bond the current port arrangement at Waitemata Harbour has terrorised the city and its balance sheet.
This report clearly outlines the direction of travel. The days of Auckland Super City maintaining a port and continuing to encroach upon the harbour, those days are over. This is the King Kong of infrastructure projects, nigh on $10 billion. It will take some time, but it gives substance to our government's position that we are transformational and we are ambitious to improve the infrastructure of our country. This is arguably the epic infrastructure project of my generation and future generations. Admittedly, it's not for the faint-hearted. However, the report will outline a trajectory, and then Cabinet Ministers, chaired by the Prime Minister, will form a governmental view about the report.
When you say this is the King Kong of infrastructure projects, do you mean it is large, or do you mean it'll hang over the city and terrorise it?
Well, the city is already being terrorised by congestion with the ports of Auckland. The city's balance sheet is being terrorised because the ports of Auckland can't even pay a dividend, and it is losing business every week to Tauranga. Now, look, I know there are sensitivities in the mind of the Mayor of Auckland, Phil Goff, as to when this might happen, but the New Zealand government, it governs for the entirety of New Zealand. We don't just govern for Auckland. And this project, when I use the term King Kong, reflects the fact that it is colossal, it is epic, and it has the capacity to future-proof New Zealand's trading relationship, export relationship with the international shipping lines and the rest of the world.
Shane Jones talking to reporter Jordan Bond. The recommended scenario would have the Port of Tauranga continuing its planned development, and cruise liners would still dock at Auckland. Now, the group is working on a final report. And finally tonight, the Hollywood actor Gina Davis has told an audience in Auckland that changes to gender inequality should begin on screen. The star is one of the headline speakers at the two-day Power of Inclusion Film Industry Conference, where she said film and TV producers have an opportunity to present a vision of the future. The star of the 1991 female-focused classic, Thelma and Louise, has been a long-time proponent of women's rights and an advocate for gender equality. She founded the Gina Davis Institute on Gender in Media in 2004. Speaking a short time ago, she said gender disparity is often starkly obvious at leadership level.
Think about this. Nearly every sector of our society has a huge gender disparity. I'm sure it's similar here to what it is mostly around the world, particularly in leadership positions. So how long is it going to take to correct that, to reach parity, no matter how hard we work? We can't snap our fingers and suddenly half of corporate boards are women. It's going to take a long time to make some of these changes. How are we going to conquer the gender bias in all of us, conscious and unconscious, that holds us back? So here's my theory of change. There's one category of gross gender inequality where the underrepresentation of women can be fixed absolutely overnight, and it's on screen. The very next project somebody makes, the next movie, TV show, can be gender balanced. We can make this change happen very fast in the time it takes to create a new show or a new film. We can present a whole new vision of the future. Yes, there are woefully few female CEOs in the world. Half of them can be female on screen immediately. How are we possibly going to get the number of women and girls interested in STEM careers that we need for science, technology, engineering, and math? There can be droves of women in STEM careers now on TV and in movies, and it will happen in real life. Our motto, as I said, is if they can see it, they can be it. And we don't have to wait for society to turn things around. We can create the future now through what people see on screen. And then life will imitate art.
The Hollywood actor Gina Davis speaking a short time ago. That is all we've got time for this evening. Don't forget that you can go online and see our visual stories if you missed them this afternoon. We will be back again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The body of a Victoria University student who died in a hostel last year was not found for 3 days. Electricity retailers say they will work with the government on the detail of big changes aimed at driving down power prices. The Justice Minister says stickers promoting a white supremacist group are putting universities in a difficult position. The interim report of a working group is recommending a $10 billion relocation of Auckland's port to Northland. And a former Christchurch mayor says voters have to decide for themselves whether to vote for embattled councilor Dion Swiggs. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7 o'clock.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Let us hope that our politicians actually start to think about also using the gold card as a primary sort of identification.
Live with local, national and international stories and some music with your news.
The winner of the Silver Scroll